So in this training, we're going to be going over why white label leads don't work. And I want to preface with what are white label leads. White label leads are leads that you get from a lead vendor. They've been sourced by some third party. They're generic, no real branding or loyalty or trust with those leads. They're basically shipped off to maybe you, maybe multiple advisors, and you go out to try and convert those leads. So that is what a white label lead is. Now, I want to cover why they don't work, and likely the reason you've always thought that marketing or advertising or trying to grow through a digital presence for an advisory firm just doesn't work. So I want to break down why white label leads don't work so you can understand the actual reason behind it, the why behind it, to understand then how can we do things differently to improve lead quality and actually generate, highly qualified, interested prospects. So the first issue with white label leads is generic sourcing. And so what this means is, again, like we talked about just a second ago, these leads are generated through third-party retirement websites. And something along the lines of find your advisor match or get connected with, set a fiduciary or a certified financial planner. And then what they do is they go through, maybe they ask some questions or answer some questions. Maybe here they even give away like a free ebook or some kind of value that's branded to their general third-party page. And then they distribute these leads to different advisors. Now the problem here is there's zero trust and zero loyalty built. And you're likely just catching people in the spur of the moment. Someone's maybe scrolling the internet looking for some answers. They're like, maybe I'll meet with a CFP, or someone's interested in that ebook that they're showing. Like, maybe I'll meet with, or I'll give my information away. And then you try and hunt these people down, and you come to find out they have zero care for who you are. They never really intended to work with you. The few that maybe were open to working with an advisor are more so defensive and trying to ask you why it should be you over actually having bought into you as an advisor. And that is because they are generically sourced. They have no loyalty to you. They do not care for you specifically. They came for some other reason, and then we're basically bait and switched into trying to get them to work with you specifically. And so what happens when you work with these generic sourcing lead vendors, a lot of times you're guaranteed a set number of leads, 40 leads per month, or 20 appointments or phone calls per month. And a lot of advisors fall for this, especially maybe newer advisors who haven't gone through this generic lead vending system. And what happens is they're just incentivized to get you name, email, phone number. They do not care whether these people actually convert into business. And therefore, you're like, well, yeah, I met with a bunch of people, or I got a bunch of leads, but my ROI was negative. And so this is the first foundational issue, is the generic sourcing. And the second reason, or what this generic sourcing typically ends up leading to, is a game of reaching that lead first, because there's no exclusivity or trust, like we spoke about. And so what happens is these people give their information, they're kind of bait and switch, maybe not entirely bait and switch, but a lot of times they're not very committed. And the second they do this, they're getting a call from 5 different advisors, all trying to get their business. And maybe that first advisor has a little bit of a chance of having a good conversation, but if you are not that first advisor, they're just going to be extremely annoyed that they have 4 other advisors calling them. And so you end up in this rat race trying to chase down these prospects who are never that interested or loyal to you in the beginning, or the first place. And now they're getting spammed by multiple advisors, and their level of trust or intent just decreases as that happens. Now, say maybe you're not working with one of the big lead vendors and you've tried a one-off kind of lead vending system, maybe a little smaller, and they say they've got this proprietary strategy, or they use unique ads, etc. It may sound great in theory, but a lot of times the issue with this is you have no idea what is on the front end. And as such, there's a big disconnect. And I'll kind of explain what this means, and you've probably experienced it before. So what happens is, say a company runs said ads, or they do some kind of outreach on a third-party site, and then they basically ship these leads over to you, the advisor. A lot of times they'll say, oh, it's proprietary, or I can't really show you the ads, or you don't need to worry about the ads, we just have a system that works and gets you leads. Well, if you experience this, a lot of times you might get some leads, and again, they'll do the 40 leads guaranteed, or maybe your money back, or 20 appointments guaranteed, and they'll fulfill on maybe the 40 leads or the 20 appointments. But the problem is, you sit down with these people, and they come to you with a completely different idea or expectation of what you are going to do for them. And it all happens here in this ad, in the front end. If someone sees an ad that says, oh, get a 20% cash bonus on your annuity that's going to pay you 8% guaranteed for life, and it's going to save your retirement. Well, you as an advisor may have signed up thinking you're going to be sitting down with qualified prospects. So when that person with $200,000 in savings comes to you expecting you to save their retirement and make it their dream retirement, you're never going to close that business. You likely don't even want to close that business, which is why the disconnect fails here. And we'll go over in kind of later modules our digital wealth prospecting system and how we're very focused on the cohesiveness of that funnel so that when prospects sit down with you, they're getting what they saw here. There's no disconnect. There's no bait and switch. They very much get what they saw in that ad, and it's a meaningful, engaging conversation. So that's another big issue with white label leads. And so what does this all lead to? It leads to a poor ROI, or return on investment. And I really want to hit on this here because a lot of advisors are very focused on metrics that don't mean anything, like cost per lead or cost per appointment, when really the only thing that matters is not your cost per lead or your cost per appointment. It's your cost per acquisition, your CPA. How much does it cost you to actually close business, acquire that business, collect that revenue? And a lot of times people will tell you, oh, we get the cheapest cost per leads, or oh, we get the cheapest cost per bookings. Sometimes that might be a scenario of you get what you paid for. Those cheap leads are going to be those low intent bait and switch leads. Those cheap booked appointments are going to be the bait and switch appointments, or they got convinced to sit down with you or overpromised. And you're going to end up seeing a drastically higher cost per acquisition because your close rate is, a lot of times 0%. You're never closing any leads. You should be able to close at least 15 to 25% of all cold traffic. But that takes nurturing on the front end, cohesiveness, different pieces that we'll talk about. So if I told you, hey, I could get you a cost per lead of $1,000, but every single lead is going to close and it's going to be someone with $2 million who's going to move it all over. Well, we're taking a 1% fee. We'll say we're purely managing assets. I just made $20,000 in that first year off of that $1,000 lead, which I close every single one. So my cost per acquisition is $1,000. I'm paying $1,000 to get $20,000 in revenue. I don't care that my cost per lead is high. I don't care if my cost per booking is high, because my cost per acquisition makes sense and I'm seeing a positive ROI here. And that is the biggest thing that a lot of advisors don't focus on. They get fooled by a lot of these lead guarantees or appointment guarantees, and they never actually focus on the revenue and the close rate and cost per acquisition. So that's another reason why a lot of times white label leads don't work. And the final one is going to be brand equity. And basically the idea that there's no long-term scalability to the system, or there's no long-term optimization benefits. And I'll explain what I mean by that here. So if I'm using lead vendors, and again, we've kind of talked about, they don't ever see you on the front end. There's no brand awareness. There's no marketing. there's no long-term value. You can't run ads or do content and all of a sudden, maybe you're converting people who saw an ad 3 months ago and finally decided to move forward with you. You don't get that from a white label lead system. And so what happens is you are set paying that same price for lead services or the cost per lead, cost per appointment into perpetuity. So you never see a decrease in cost per acquisition. The only way you do see a decrease in cost per acquisition is if your close rate drastically increases. And most of the time, your close rate is not going to increase because, again, what we just talked about, there's no nurturing on those prospects. So even if somehow you do achieve just a barely positive ROI or something that is sustainable for you, you're not going to get any long-term benefits of a decreased cost per acquisition. Because if we're building something that we own and we don't rent, eventually over time, the longer we're running the system, making it better, people are seeing it, we're getting brand awareness, our overall firm cost per acquisition will decrease. If we're running ads, people will become familiar with us. If we're doing organic content, people will become familiar with us. And eventually you might get people who just come to your website. They opt in, they've seen you before, the omnipresence. And then they will come in and just work with you without you even having to really pay to acquire that client. So you get no long-term benefit, again, from white label leads. So this is the issue with white label leads and why they do not work, or why you've likely tried it before and never actually gotten anything sustainable, if anything at all, from them. Now, what are we going to transition to? I want to briefly touch on the opposite side of things, which is in-house, or systems you own, not rent. So think about this. I want to preface this, the whole concept of lead vending. This is why it's very funny to me. Imagine if the Ritz-Carlton, okay? They obviously are a hotel service. Imagine they went and they were like, I'm going to go on Expedia and we're going to put the Ritz-Carlton on Expedia. Some deal bargain shopping third-party page that just gets cheap leads and intense. Well, that may work. The Ritz-Carlton may get some inquiries. But guess what? None of them are going to be able to afford the Ritz-Carlton services. None of them are really going to be bought into the vision of the Ritz-Carlton. And it's going to diminish the value of the Ritz-Carlton just by even being on Expedia, which is the same reason you, as a premium financial services company or advisor, you try and go and buy leads and you try to persuade these people who are going for the cheapest solution, these clickbait ads, things like that, and you never convert them. It never works. So the idea here is that we want to nurture people throughout the entire process. If there's lead to client, along this journey, their trust should be increasing. And when their trust increases, their price sensitivity, their hesitancies decrease. So we're increasing trust and decreasing objections or hesitancy. And this is done through strategically placing content, whether it's an ebook here, whether it's a webinar, a training, speaking with just an appointment setter or someone who will be their concierge. That entire way leading up, we're increasing their trust and decreasing their objections. And we're strategically placing these things to do that. This ebook may hit on a really specific pain point. This webinar might dive into how they can achieve their goals and their aspirations. And this training might do a lot of handling of frequently asked questions. And then when they speak to the setter, we really discover and find out their unique kind of situation. So when we're trying to convert them to a client, they're very warmed up to what we do, how we operate, and why they should work with us. And the beauty here is you control the entirety of this client journey. Say maybe you're just getting into it. Maybe you're a newer advisor and you just want lead volume. You want to speak with people on the phone, but people who are somewhat bought into you. You can very much create a much simpler prospect journey where maybe instead of having all these different steps, it's just, maybe a free resource, but it's branded to you. It's actually on what you do. And then you speak with people on the phone. It's a phone call. That client journey is much shorter. Now, you might not have as high of a close rate, but maybe you're really great on the phone, or you've got something on the back end you want to build out here where you'll send them other materials and resources to convert them. You control this client journey. Or maybe you want it very thorough where you're only getting a specific type of client. You control it. And what this does is we build relationships based on how we want it to happen, what we want them to see. So when they actually come to us, our close rate is much higher. You can still very much generate cheap leads, just like these lead vendors do by doing a shorter client journey. Now, it's going to take more work on the back end to close that business, but they're still going to be bought into you because they weren't generated for third party or they weren't sent to other advisors. So they're still better leads, but again, they're a little farther back in the client journey. So really what we want to focus on is increasing our close rate. And the way to increase our close rate is by building trust, giving value, and educating prospects before they ever get the opportunity to become a client. And when we achieve this, we're going to have a positive ROI and the lowest possible cost per acquisition, which is all we really care about. So this is the high-level overview of why white label leads don't work, and it should preface exactly why we do everything we do throughout the remainder of this program. I'll see you in the next one.